Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. This is our last video for Spooktober this year, and it is yet again another true crime case. Today we will be talking about the occult murder of Mabel Leyshon. Our story takes place in the Welsh island of Anglesey, in a village with an extremely long name that I will instead be flashing on the screen. Now, this village has a small population of 3,000 people, which is mostly comprised of the elderly. This place had a relatively low crime rate and was said to have been a very safe and peaceful place to live in. Well, not until 2001. Mabel Leyshon was a 90-year-old widow who has lived in that same house in that village for the past 50 years. She and her husband never had any children, so after he passed, she kept herself busy by making art, which was something that she was very passionate about. At 90 years old, Mabel was in great shape. She was physically healthy and didn't have any major health issues aside from needing a hearing aid. And despite living alone, she would often be visited by a friend and one of her nieces. On November 25th, 2001, at around 12:30 at noon, a Meals on Wheels volunteer arrived at Mabel's front door, ready to give her lunch for the day. However, after multiple attempts at knocking and calling out to Mabel, the volunteer received no response. This volunteer then moved to the back door, thinking that Mabel, who had a hearing impairment, just did not hear the knocks. However, upon reaching the back side of the house, the volunteer noticed that one glass panel of Mabel's windows had been smashed in. Alarmed by this, the volunteer quickly called the police. A female officer managed to squeeze her way in through that broken glass panel to check the inside of the home, calling out to Mabel multiple times along the way. And still, there was no response. And upon reaching the living room, the officer then spots someone who seemed to be sitting on a sofa with a blanket pulled over their head. This person was unresponsive, and after slowly removing the blanket, the officer found 90-year-old Mabel Leyshon dead, and obviously not due to natural causes. The house was quickly cordoned off for investigation. In the living room, two brass pokers positioned in the shape of a crucifix were found near Mabel's feet, along with some candles. Mabel was found to have been stabbed a total of 22 times. She also had self defense wounds, indicating that she did try and fight off her attacker. She also had a huge open wound from her chest all the way to her abdomen. Her heart ripped out. A saucepan on a silver platter was also found near her body, and placed on it was something oozing with blood and wrapped in newspaper. The pathologist and other investigators already had a pretty good idea of what this was, but decided not to check on the scene to avoid contamination. And once they got it on the lab, they confirmed that this was indeed Mabel Leyshon's heart. But here's the odd thing about the entire crime scene. Despite how brutal this scene was and how brutally she had been murdered, there's not a lot of blood. There were also no fingerprints found, indicating that the culprit was prepared and wore gloves. A bloodied shoe print, however, was found, as well as a smear of blood on one of the broken glass pieces from the smashed window. Now, upon further autopsy, it was also discovered that huge cuts on the inside of her elbows as well as the back of her legs had been made on Mabel post mortem. Investigators were quick to realize that these were spots where major blood vessels are, and came up with a theory that Mabel's murder had something to do with the occult. Authorities went from one house to another, trying to get information from Mabel's neighbors. However, no one knew anything, nor did anyone see anything strange during that day or the days before that. Since they had no information, no leads, no suspects, A police profiler was then called, and now they were looking for a male aged 80 to 60 years old, which honestly is quite a broad age range. The profile also says that this suspect could either be living alone or still living with his parents, had some sort of previous contact or encounter with Mabel, and most probably suffered from a type of personality disorder or mental illness. The blood smear found on the window was tested and found to be from a male. Then men in the area who fit the age range were then tested, but no match was ever found. 9 days into the gruesome discovery, the police got their first suspect. Not too far away from Mabel's house, a 37-year-old man named David Griffiths took his own life by dousing his entire body in petrol and lighting himself on fire before jumping off a bridge. The authorities initially thought that this guy had something to do with Mabel's demise as he scratched multiple crosses on the bridge before committing. And if you remember, two brass pokers were left near Mabel's body and it was formed in a crucifix. The police were convinced that this was their guy. However, upon further investigation, this man had no links to Mabel at all, and his DNA did not match the one found at the crime scene. And just a side note, I can't even begin to imagine what David Griffith's family were going through at that time. I mean, their loved one had just taken his own life. And before they could even process this and before they could even mourn his death, he had been accused of an extremely brutal murder. And turns out he had nothing to do with it. I really hope that they had some sort or they received some sort of formal apology for this because no family should ever go through anything like this. Anyway, back to our story. Since there were no more leads coming in, the authorities decided to take a look at the clues or the evidence found at the crime scene once again. The shoe print found, and it was later discovered to be from Levi trainers that luckily didn't sell well, with only 52 pairs sold in the area. A list of buyers was then provided to hopefully help with the investigation, but this too was a dead end. Upon further analysis by the forensics team, a lip imprint was also found on the saucepan where Mabel's heart was placed, and this gave them the eerie thought: did the perpetrator drink Mabel's blood? A month after, the details of this case was leaked to the public because at this point, the whole community knew of Mabel Leyshon's murder, but they weren't really told of the gruesome details. However, a month after, this was all leaked to the public, causing a massive shock and fear amongst the community, of course. Rumors started to spread, so the police decided to create a reconstruction of events for Crime Watch and also use this as a way to encourage the public to come in with information if they knew anything or found anyone suspicious. And someone did. It actually worked. A teenage boy called the police station to tell them of a weird encounter he recently had with another teenager. According to him, he was at a party with a 17-year-old male acquaintance and a 16-year-old female German exchange student. And in the middle of the party, the male friend suddenly started to talk about vampires, creeping the German exchange student out. He mentioned how the village they lived in was perfect for vampires because most of its residents were senior citizens who were slower in pace and usually lived by themselves. He then also asked this German girl to bite him on the neck and became aggressive when she refused. He also punched himself on the nose to make himself bleed and asked others at the party to smell his blood. He was then restrained by a few partygoers, including the teenage boy who called the police to report this bizarre incident. Now, this weirdo was 17-year-old Matthew Hardman. He was described to be a pretty normal kid. He was well behaved and quite polite. So, people in the area were taken by surprise when they found out that he was suspected of being involved in Mabel's murder. Now, Matthew wasn't really a new face to the authorities, and they were quite familiar with him because just a few days after, they actually interviewed Matthew. However, his blood sample was never collected as he was a minor and did not fit the age range provided by the police profiler. He also had an alibi saying that he was with a friend that night. However, the friend he claimed to have been with that evening was actually the same boy who gave his information to the police. So they quickly cross examined Matthew's alibi and later found out that he was not with this acquaintance the day Mabel was murdered. Investigators then decided to pay Matthew's house a little visit to try and figure out how he was at home and what he was interested in. They discovered that he was living with his mom and her partner and that Matthew's dad died when he was young. They also noticed that Matthew, just like Mabel, was a gifted artist. However, their art styles were very different from one another, as Matthew's artwork depicted extremely graphic and violent scenes. And while the police were talking to him, they asked if he knew Mabel at all, and he said, "No, I don't know her." And his mother corrected him right away, saying, "What do you mean you don't know her? You were her paper boy for years." It was honestly one red flag after another. However, what the police found next was more damning. In Matthew's room, they found the exact same Levi trainers with the exact same size as the shoe print found at the scene. A knife was also obtained from his jacket pocket, and on it was some dried up blood, which was later tested against Mabel's DNA. Matthew also had an extensive collection of occult books and had an obvious fascination with satanic rituals and vampires. And not long after this house visit, the DNA test results came out. The blood on Mabel's window matched Matthew's, and the blood on Matthew's knife was found to be of Mabel Leyshon's. On January 8th, 2002, Matthew Hardman was arrested and finally admitted to knowing Mabel Leyshon. He admitted to targeting her specifically as he knew that she lived alone and she was quite frail as she was already 90 years old. According to him, he broke into the house by smashing in one of the back windows, taking Mabel by surprise. She tried to fight back and defend herself, however, after having been stabbed 22 times, Mabel lost and quickly succumbed to her injuries. Matthew then took the two pokers, placed them in the shape of a crucifix, and lit candles before beginning his ritual. And he then sliced Mabel's upper body open and ripped out her heart, cutting off the tip to squeeze her blood out onto the saucepan where he later drank it from. He also cut her major arteries to get more blood, believing that this sacrifice would turn him into a vampire and provide him with immortality. August 2nd, 2002, Matthew Hardman was found guilty of murdering old Mabel Leyshon. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 12 years. And he was given this lighter sentence because he was only 17 years old during the crime. However, it has been 22 years and Matthew is still behind bars. And honestly, I don't think, personally, this is just my opinion. I personally don't think that he will be getting out anytime soon or at all because of the severity of what he did. And that is pretty much all the information that I have for you guys for today's case. And that is pretty much all that I have for Spooktober 2024. I hope you guys enjoyed this series. I will be linking the complete playlist down below should you if you missed any of my uploads. I uploaded a total of 14 videos for Spooktober, so go ahead and check out the other ones if you haven't. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on my next video.